Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host for the podcast. Prescription for Success is produced with support from MD Coaches, a professional coaching service empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. My guest today is Dr. Joe Lichten, who is a dietitian and performance coach with an extensive career as an advisor and consultant in the food industry, and more recently as a motivational speaker promoting healthy diet and lifestyle for employees of large industries such as Marriott and Hyatt Hotels, GE, AT&T, Westinghouse, IBM, and many others. The audience response at these presentations is consistently enthusiastic because her own energy and enthusiasm is very contagious. Dr. Lichten earned her bachelor's degree in food, nutrition, and institutional management at State University of New York in Plattsburgh. Later, she earned a master's in human nutrition from Virginia Tech University. And finally, in 1989, she completed her PhD in adult education at Texas A&M University. Dr. Joe, as she likes to be called, is also a prolific writer with 6 books to her credit, in addition to hundreds of newspaper and magazine articles, including Cosmopolitan, Weight Watchers, and Men's Health. I've been thinking that as healthcare professionals, we spend the vast majority of our time battling disease, but I think we could really benefit ourselves and our patients if we would concentrate a little bit more effort on staying healthy. Dr. Joe Lichten has some superb advice on that subject. So now let's hear my interview. And today we're talking with Dr. Joe Lichten, who is coming to us from the area down in on the Atlantic coast of Florida near Jacksonville. Very nice to have you, Joe. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Randy, for inviting me.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and we've already had a little bit of an introduction to get us in here, but I'll just reiterate that Dr. Joe Lichten markets herself as a fuel efficiency expert, which is something that we don't run into every day. And we're going to talk about how you came to be a fuel efficiency expert and just exactly what that is and why physicians and nurses and other healthcare professionals ought to know more about that. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I hope you are too.
Yes.
So let's start with how you got there. Now, my researchers tell me that your early life was spent in upstate New York, at least your undergraduate education, and went to State University of New York in Plattsburgh for your undergraduate degree, and that was in food and nutrition. That was the major. And what was your intention to do with that degree at the time?
That's a good question, Randy. My intention at that point had nothing to do with helping other people. I don't know if that's typical for most people that are age 17, but I was all about, because it's supposed to be a health profession to help other people with their health. But mine was all about helping myself. I was in the midst of an eating disorder that extended severely for over 5 years. And then it kind of, tapered off a little bit in the recovery and all that. But it was all about how can I help myself? And I thought, well, if I understood more about health and nutrition, then I could help myself. But of course, that wasn't the solution.
But that's really sort of an unusual bit of real intellectual engineering, I think, Joe, at the age of 17. that you were able to intellectualize what was going on, and I'm sure you can educate us all on how difficult it is for people to be logically engaged if they're dealing with an eating disorder. So what do you think made you different? How did you decide to take a more academic approach to that problem?
I'm one of 9 kids, and anybody that grows up in a large family has kind of 2 different experiences. Either everybody bands together and they help each other. That wasn't my family. My family was, everybody to themselves type of thing. And I never felt comfortable asking other people questions for help. And I became what my mother had told me that I had said from the beginning of 2 and 3. I'm big girl. I can do it myself. And so instead of, reaching out for other people to help me, I relied upon myself. I mean, that's just something I know about myself. And I think a lot of people in your audience can probably identify, I'm big girl or big boy, It's hard for us to ask for help. And so I went looking for the solutions myself. In fact, the 4 years didn't help. So I thought, well, I need a master's degree. So
were you just out of curiosity, were you the first child, the last child, or somewhere in the middle?
Number three. Yeah.
So you were a bit in the middle.
Yeah. Well, as my mom used to refer to us, I was in the first family. So there was Rick, Sue, Joanne, and then there was the next 3 and the next 3. I was in the first family. And again, anyone with large families can identify the family dynamics. It's, you can say something about the firstborn in the middle, and when you get thrown in number 3, it's kind of like, it just depends on where everybody was born. And so we were all 18 months to 24 months apart. But we somehow did separate into 3 families in terms of our upbringing. And that's a longer whole discussion. And this isn't a psychological analysis, but I went looking for the answers in research. I highly relied upon research. So instead of just, trusting other people with their opinions, I always looked for the science.
So that leads us into the next stage, which led to graduate school at Virginia Tech, I think.
Yeah, Virginia Tech.
And what was the plan? What was the new plan?
Well, the new plan was still recovery, but I really enjoyed diving deep into the nutrition aspect. In fact, one of my books was called Eat Out Healthy, and sometimes you'd get on a radio or a TV show and people would say, well, but how do you make such and such? And I'm like, I wrote the book Eat Out Healthy because I eat out a lot. So I wasn't into the food preparation end of nutrition and dietetics. It was all about the science, about how the body worked. I was just fascinated.
And don't most of us nowadays do more eating out than we do eating in?
Yeah, and I don't think that that's a sin. Some people will say things like, I eat out too much. But you know what? There are options out there as well. But again, I was still all about the science of the human body and how it worked. And a lot of my drive in my career had to do with trying to understand me and how I worked. And while a lot of people, like when you think about eating disorders, a lot of these people go into the clinics or the hospital settings or whatever, and they pump them with a lot of calories, and then you work on the psychological piece. Because let's face it, it's not a physical, it's more a psychological thing. But I think throughout all my recovery, I realized that unless you can fuel the body appropriately, there's no way that psychology piece is going to work. And of course, that's why they're pumping a lot of calories. But when you pump, 3,000 to 4,000 calories into somebody who's been starving themselves, that just freaks them out and makes it so much more difficult. So anyway, that's how I got involved in the whole energy piece. And what kind of turned it around was really my doctorate. So I had a very traditional dietetic background, and that it was different than what my focus is right now, I should say. And by
the time you got started on your doctorate, you had moved along to Texas, right?
Oh,
Texas
yeah. So I was a clinical dietitian in a hospital setting, thinking that's all there was to do out there, because, of course, this was a long time ago, and it kind of really was what a dietitian did. But 3 years in the hospital setting, and I said, this is not for me. It was probably what a lot of people in your audience right now are thinking about, like you got into a field because of one thing, and then you found out, no, it's a lot of paperwork rather than patient work. Well, for me, it was a lot of repetitiveness. So you had exactly 15 minutes to change somebody's life as they walked out the door of a hospital. Well, that doesn't work in terms of change. And so I was feeling probably a lot of the same frustrations that some of the listeners are feeling right now, that I got into a field that was very different than what I thought I was getting into. And the things,
it turned out to be handing out pamphlets. I'm betting more than rather actually engaging with the patient.
Absolutely. And so, I think most of us in the health field, we love the patient contact. It's some of the other stuff that we don't enjoy and that can increase our risk of burnout. So it wasn't until I worked on my doctoral dissertation and I was teaching at the University of Texas Pan American. Actually, I founded a dietetics program and right there on the border of Mexico and Texas. It was a good 85 to 90% Hispanic. So I'm a little white girl in there and a kind of a different.
Really interested in hearing about this. Weight loss in Mexican American women taken on by somebody who couldn't possibly be more different demographic. So do tell us about that.
Well, that was. It was basically, that's why I worked with the Mexican American population, because like I said, the area was very highly Hispanic. And I heard that over and over again about if you were working with somebody on weight loss, people would laugh and say, they can't lose weight, and I'm like, what do you mean? Is that really true? And so at that point, I actually did the research in Houston because I had moved up there during the tail end of my working on my doctorate. I had finished my coursework and I moved up there. And, but still worked with that population. And when I started interviewing people who had lost weight and kept it off, I found out that these, I had this typical mindset of like the right way. So anybody that thinks about weight loss, and it doesn't matter what health profession that you're in, nurse, doctor, whatever, you typically think diet and exercise, right? And, and so I remember
easy, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Easy, right? And so I started interviewing these people and finding out, I'd ask them about their eating habits. It was very exploratory research, right? So I got them involved in just talking, and we try to come up with, what factors differentiate them from somebody else who maybe can't lose the weight. And I found out that most of these people, when I mentioned anything about diet or some change in their eating, they would laugh at me and they'd say, no, I didn't go on a diet. And I said, but did you change the way you eat? And she said, I have 9 kids. So, you think they're going to let me change what I eat? And every single interview was kind of like that, where I'm like, what? That doesn't even make sense. And then I'd ask about exercise and they'd say, no, I didn't exercise. And, I don't go to the gym. I can't afford that. Because I was interviewing a lot of people more in the barrio section. So because of where I was getting my contacts with the church and the parts of town that I had, worked with. And so again, every single interview was like, it was just blowing my mind. Like, I'm like, come on, they're not following any of the rules that I know are right. And yet these people have kept off the weight. They had to be at least 3 years. So kept it off the weight for 3, 5, 7 years. And I'm like, that just doesn't even make sense. But the more I listened to them, they taught me so much about life. And they had to do with, I actually wrote a book called Dr. Joe's No Big Deal Diet that was based on that. It's currently out of print. But at that point, I heard a lot of, no, it's no big deal. All I did was, and then fill in the blank, and they all did different things. Like one woman didn't change the way she ate because she felt like she couldn't. She didn't have much control over that in terms of her husband and her 9 kids. And I think this one even had 13 kids. It was a ridiculously large number. Of course, I came from 9, so I bet it was more than 9. I think 9 is a lot. And all she did was turn off the TV at night. And she danced in the living room with her kids. Her grandkids lived just down the road. And everybody came over for a dance party. And that was her approach. And I'm like, I've never even heard of a diet called dance party. So every single person taught me something. And it was all about change the things that you have control over Let the other things go. Don't stress over it. Be happy with small changes. Don't even look at weight loss as the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to be in better control of your body in terms of, feeling good, feeling flexible, not dwelling on food and weight as a number so much. And so they really advanced. I think at that point I was not abusing food, but still the psychological piece is a hard thing to overcome. It doesn't happen in a year or through, a 6-month treatment program. It probably took me well into my 30s before I felt like recovered. And I know some of the people in your listening audience are going to say, well, no, you're recovering anorexic or recovering. I was bulimic too. But I feel like I'm recovered in that my mind about food and diet and body and all that kind of stuff is way more normal than most people who have no eating disorders.
Yeah, and I want to say just how brilliant of you it was to make that connection. I don't have to tell you, and I bet I don't have to tell anybody in the audience, that the numbers of so-called solutions to weight loss are way too numerous to count.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done some work in that area in my own professional practice in the past, and I'm just astounded at the numbers of solutions that are focused on eating and eating alone, with very little attention to changing lifestyle. And that's
Absolutely.
not to say that every diet book doesn't include a section that says that you got to exercise, but that's a little different from changing your lifestyle, as you know.
And even recently, the mention of sleep, that's fairly new. How sleep impacts. I mean, lack of sleep, it just changes the hormones in your gut so that you think you're hungry when you're not, or you think you're not as full as you are. And so people tend to overeat, even with just a half hour less sleep every night. So with some people, that's probably the number one thing they should change, is making sure they have enough sleep. But still, this gets away from the whole energy thing. What changed in my life is something that's never taught in my training. I don't think in any health profession, is thinking of the body in terms of its whole energy source. In other words, when people have an eating disorder, or let's just say they have disordered eating, which is far more common, where people spend a lot of time dwelling about eating and so forth, or their body in terms of exercise or whatever, they tend to think in terms of what's going to get me the results that I need, rather than how I look at it is, what is going to give me the energy I need so that everything else becomes easier. So in other words, if you are fully energized, then you feel like exercising. You feel like eating healthier. You don't feel like sitting on the couch and saying, give me the Haagen-Dazs and downing that, or the wine or the beer or whatever, right? When you're energized, you just naturally feel like taking better care of yourself. And yet we all know that the best car with the greatest design in terms of engine and styling and so forth, in terms of wind resistance, doesn't really matter if you don't put gas in the tank. It's not going to go anywhere without gas in the tank. And yet we all know that food is what provides us the energy that we need. But some foods just naturally fuel us better than others. And once we start looking at food, not in terms of calories, not in terms of how much protein or how much vitamin C or whatever, but rather in terms of how does this food energize me so everything else becomes easier.
So it's not so much about the food, it's about the food efficiency.
There you go, the fuel efficiency.
And when we're hearing it from a food efficiency expert, which I love that little moniker, and I congratulate you for being brilliant enough to come up with that.
Yeah, it only took me 40 years to come up with it.
Well, so now we're, I don't know if I should say we're at the culmination of a brilliant 40-year career, but you have produced your latest book, which is called REBOOT, which I'm sure revolves around the food efficiency phenomenon. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, REBOOT actually covers more than just the food stuff. See, because I believe that energy certainly comes from the way we eat, but the way we feel energized comes from the way that we eat, sleep, move, and think. So, for some people, like I have worked with clients. I worked with Johnson & Johnson's Human Performance Institute for 7 years, coaching what were mainly a lot of C-suite executives. We had a lot of physicians and other health professionals come through the program, more physicians than anything else. Oftentimes they were head of a department or running a hospital rather than, just your doc in the box docs, because maybe they can't get away as often, or maybe they couldn't pay the fee of this type of program. It was an expensive program. It was not my program, so I can just say that. So some people say that was a limitation. But what I learned from a lot of these people is that they were, looking for a way to energize, and some of them were thinking down the wrong path. So in other words, there was this one doc that I was working with, and I remember him telling me, we were talking about energy, and he said, "Joe, you don't understand. I have tons of energy. I go. I'm working at least 12 hours a day. I have no problems with energy until I step in the house after a long day. And then I'm just incapable of anything else. I can't give to my family. I can't practice my hobbies anymore. I'm wasted." He said, so my problem is not the energy during the day. I'm fine. How do I have more energy in the evening? And so they're thinking about it backwards. So how do you have more energy in the evening? Well, you still have to control your energy during the day, so you have some left over. And some people will say, well, I can't give as much at work. And that isn't what it's all about. It's not like, okay, I have to spare, I have to hold back some energy. No, you have to learn how to expand your energy. So in other words, the way that you work during the day can affect your energy at night. For example, we know that small bits of movement or microbursts of movement can help us to increase our energy. When I say increase our energy, the way that we focus and concentrate, the attitude that we have. When we have good energy, we're positive, we're outgoing, we're creative, we want to work well with other people. When we don't have good energy, think about that Snickers commercial, right? When our energy is our lowest, we're not ourselves. We're not our best self. And so it could be just taking microbursts of movement. We all know when we're sitting in the same position, and doctors do this a lot, right? Especially perhaps in an operating room where you have to, be at the same position for hours at a time, right? Our energy tends to wane for that. So what can we do to increase some microbursts of movement, perhaps not in the operating room? I'm not here to advise about that, but like during the day, how can we run up a few flights of stairs or, take a walk out the building around the hospital one time, and it only takes a couple of minutes. And sometimes that's enough to boost your energy. The way you eat also during the day is going to influence whether or not you have any energy left at the end of the day.
That makes so much sense. It really does.
Randy, I don't know. I'd love to have a survey about how physicians eat, but it seems like about every physician I meet will tell me they don't eat breakfast, they don't eat lunch, and they'll tell me that they like to keep their energy up, and they find that if they eat anything during the day, it drops their energy. But that isn't it. It's not the food itself. Food is fuel. It's what they're eating that's making the difference.
And what they're doing with the energy, I think, and I supposed to be an interview about you, and it is, but I will share some personal experience with you as a surgeon. I will tell you that it was my experience over the years that I operated that it didn't matter how little sleep that I got when I got into the operating room. It was easy for me to function very well because I was dealing in a very focused task,
right?
And there was no problem staying alert in that situation.
Right.
But one case is over, and you've got maybe 30 minutes in the operating room lounge, and could barely keep my eyes open.
Yeah.
But at the next case, suddenly I'm 100% again. Later on, when I stopped operating and I was running a wound care clinic, I found that I was easily fatigued in that office setting, and I did exactly what you just suggested. About every hour or so, I would simply walk out the back door and walk around the block.
Yep.
And when I got back in, I was fully alert. So I am really seeing some brilliance in what you're talking about here. And it sounds, am I right that this is sort of the basis of Reboot? Is this where you were headed with that book?
It's about rebooting the energy, absolutely. And it's about expanding the energy. So in other words, getting people to think in terms of, if I want to have more energy after work or on the weekends or on my days off, because it may not be the weekends, I have to then spare my energy during the workday, or I have to work fewer hours. And that's not what I'm saying at all. It's all about how can we reboot our energy during the day. And those microbursts of movement are absolutely critical. The human body was not meant to stand still. We come out of the womb kicking and squirming, and and I have a couple of 2-year-old grandkids, a couple that are 5. None of these are twins; they're just from different kids, and they are rambunctious, as you know. I mean, so we were born to move, and somehow we've gotten into this sedentary state. So even standing more often, so that's movement. But it isn't just about movement. For some people, it's about getting more sleep. And because there are so many studies showing that when people don't get enough sleep, even though they can perform very well under situations like you just described in the operating room, which is probably a little bit of adrenaline going on there, right? Because somebody's life right there at your hands. Absolutely. But that's fake energy, right? Adrenaline calls upon, our energy stores, and this, but it's not like real energy. It's kind of like taking a cup of coffee. So many of us survive on the fake energy sources of either adrenaline or of caffeine, and I'm sure there's a few other drugs that we could add to that mix, rather than finding energy from real source like the way that we eat. Now, I tell you, you talked about half hour between patients and you can barely keep your eyes open, but you were, fully awake at the next one. I can relate to that. For me, one of the things that works really well for me is taking a power nap. And I will have people admit to me, not publicly, but kind of like, can I tell you something? Here's what I do. So I know that there are people out there, not just me, I'm admitting it publicly, that take power naps. And including CEOs of some of these companies. And you're like, no, these important people can't be taking power. Oh, they absolutely are. And when I mean a power nap, it could be 5 minutes. It could be 10 minutes. We're not talking an hour and a half siesta, just something. And for me, when I'm dozing off like that, feeling, my eyes are droopy, I feel like it's almost as if I fall asleep and bam, I wake up. And it's like what happens to our computers. Your computers they don't act up as much as they used to like 10 and 20 years ago. But you remember they were like, all of a sudden they're not responding or they're slow, and you just shut it down, reboot it. And guess what? I don't know what happens on the back end, but it's working fine. And I feel like a power nap does that for me. And so, for some people it'll work, some people it won't. I mean, you got to find out what your secret weapon is. But
it's really interesting that you should bring that up, because I can tell you that if you walk into any operating room lounge in any hospital, if there are more than 3 or 4 surgeons in that lounge, at least 2 or 3 of them will be asleep. And, they're doing, maybe not necessarily purposely, but they're doing exactly what you're talking about.
Well, unfortunately, purposeful power napping is much better than dozing off.
Right. So
it actually take the intention of I'm going to shut down and reboot, rather, because when you've had it, I'm thinking like after Thanksgiving when you see everybody just drifting off, that is not, that kind of drifting off is not, it doesn't reboot. It doesn't offer recovery in quite the same way as actually going through. And it's obviously not a sleep cycle, but there's something that goes on within that some people have told me, I had this one gentleman, he was not a doctor, but he was a CEO, that he would share with me that he would rest his arms on his armrest in his chair. So he's still upright in his desk chair. His arms are resting on both armrests. He would put a pen between his thumb and his, pointer finger, and off the edge of that desk. And when he would drift off, that pen would then hit the hardwood floor. He would wake up and he said that was all he needed. Anyway, the longer you nap, as you know, more than say, I know most research says 30 minutes. I think from practical use and talking with people who do nap, they tell me no more than 20 minutes. And I've found that as well. When you go more than 20 minutes, especially if you are sleep deprived, or if you didn't have a good night's sleep the night before, it doesn't really matter. You're much more likely to drift into that deep sleep relatively quickly or quicker than you would normally. And so, short, napping episode might be it. Or maybe it's just getting more sleep at night. One of my first doctors, a GP, was Dr. Joanne. She was probably about my age. So I'm in my, I'm probably 30. So she's probably 30, somewhere around there. And I remember her, complaining at one point because I needed to have sleep. And it just kind of bothered me. Like, I have more important things to do than to get a good night's sleep type of thing. And why should I, need more than, say, 7 hours? Why can't 7 be enough? And anyway, she shared with me that she herself slept 9 hours every night. And I said, yeah, but not during medical school. You couldn't have done that. And she said, oh, yes. Oh, yes. So there are people that do exactly what we say we can't do. Because I have, medical students that say, I can't do that. Well, if you had more sleep, would you perform better in such that every task that you do could be done more efficiently? I mean, you just have to ask yourself. I think it's very true for me. When I've got a good night's sleep, everything gets done faster, better, so that, again, I feel like I have more energy left at the end of the day.
Well, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to move into a little bit of counseling. Not just for myself, but for everybody that works in the medical community. One of the things that you hear talked about most often, I think, when you are in the area of media that physicians and nurses and healthcare executives spend their time consuming, one of the big topics is a thing called physician burnout.
Right.
Is that something that rings a bell with you? You've heard of that one?
Yes, indeed. And just recently it was in the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, and not, I won't say frequently, but it is something that you see from time to time in the, I guess you would say the lay literature. But in any case, it is a phenomenon that we hear about more and more as time moves on. I don't think anyone has agreed on a precise definition. It's ill-defined, but no one argues that it's not real, and it's characterized by low energy, poor motivation, a feeling of lack of purpose, constant fatigue, loss of enjoyment in life. Much of that same language could be considered a very good definition of depression. But it seems that it does have a special place and a special recognizability in the world of physicians. Mm-hmm. And the type of thing that you're talking about in fuel efficiency, and particularly in your book, REBOOT, sounds to me there is a connection. And I'd be very interested to hear what you think about that. And do you have any ideas about how it should be addressed?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why I got into the field of this whole energy thing, which sounds like, I know it sounds like, woo, but I ended up looking and writing my book, REBOOT. I looked at over 1,600 articles because I'm kind of an anal person in that I have to print them off, read them thoroughly, and then number them and file them. That was just my way of organizing. So I looked at all of these things, not just what was fatigue and burnout, who has it, what some of the causes might be, but then just looking at some of the symptoms So, for example, lack of focus or memorization skills and whatnot, and looking at what kind of lifestyle factors were involved in that. And it was very convincing to me throughout all this research that, yes, the way we eat, sleep, move, and think definitely factors in on all the things that make up what we think is burnout. So, and by the way, we're talking about physicians. I was just reading an article because there are a lot of medical studies, and I've read them as well. And nurses have even higher rates of burnout than do physicians. And I'm sure we have some of those listening to us as well. And we have larger numbers of nurses too. So it's a huge problem.
I think it's a much bigger problem among nurses than it is among physicians. And I think one reason for that is that people are sort of disinclined to listen to them. They're seen as hourly wage employees, and they can control their terms. Whereas, the poor physicians, they never know when they're going to work and so forth and so on. It's just wrong. It's just terribly wrong. But go ahead. Yeah.
So do I think it's involved in burnout? Absolutely. Again, going back to that fancy whatever car that it is that you desire with the design of the car, the engine. It doesn't really matter if you're not putting fuel into it. Fuel by the way that we eat, but also even the way, we sleep. Are we getting adequate sleep? That could determine how well this engine of ours would work. And so, I think we have to kind of go back to the basics of things that we learned in medical school about how the body works. And when people, not just physicians, but anybody who says, well, I'm not hungry at breakfast, if I eat lunch, I'm going to get sleepy, so I'm not going to eat until I get home. And of course, it doesn't help with weight loss. People think that it does. I mean, this whole idea of intermittent fasting that is so popular nowadays is crazy. We used to call it skipping meals, and now it's a specialized diet, which I think is kind of funny. Of course, you will lose weight if you can eat less food, but how does it impact your energy? And how does it impact all the features of what energy is, meaning focus and concentration, healthy, positive mood, having a positive attitude towards life, having joy in your life, having goals to whatever it is that drives you in this world. So all of those factors definitely play in. And I think instead of just saying, I just need to have a hobby or I need to work fewer hours, that isn't going to solve it.
Well, it sounds like you might have some good advice for my physician and nurse colleagues in this book, and we're certainly going to give it our recommendation. The book is called REBOOT by Dr. Joe Lichten. But at this point, Joe, this is where we like to take advantage of our guests and give you total freedom with the mic, and we're going to ask you to give us your prescription for success.
All right. I thought I'd just put together a simple word, mesh. I think of the mesh that we use in some of the surgeries and so forth, because my brother was talking about his hernia the other day. But anyway, mesh meaning something that kind of connects us all together. And 4 things kind of pop out from the way I perceive energy and how it affects our success and getting rid of burnout. And that's, M for movement. It's just remind yourself we were meant to move, just like any little kid. We were all born that way. And so think about in terms of how yes, it feels good to sit down in that lazy boy recliner, but you know what? Movement is going to increase your energy, get everything going there. So, how can you get some movement during the day? Stand up, walk around, even if it's for 2 to 3 minutes. That will help with your alertness levels, and that has all been researched. E for eating. And of course, my background is all in nutrition, but instead of thinking in terms of calories or, protein or vitamins and minerals, or just in terms of what tastes good, we all evaluate food based on that. It's just, thinking in terms of how food fuels us. So in other words, a high carbohydrate breakfast like, toast and cereal and pancakes and waffles, traditional breakfast, they're just not going to hold you energy-wise in the same way that something with a mix of protein is supposed to help with. And that's because carbohydrates, as you know, are digested within an hour or so. I mean, that's why, somebody with diabetes, you can see their blood sugar goes up, and, with the right amount of insulin, it goes down. Within 2 hours, it should be back into a normal level. And if it's not, there's something going on there. But it's, the proteins and the fats that fuel us after that. So it's more of a well-balanced meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner. Some people need snacks, some people don't. And that's kind of individual. As for sleep, and I remember years back, a doctor trying to convince me that I could get used to 4.5 hours of sleep. And I thought, oh my gosh, yeah. And how many people would I kill as I wrapped myself around a telephone pole trying to get used to 4.5 hours of sleep? There's no research out there that says you can get used to it. In fact, research studies show, whether it's, I remember there's one study that some of the individuals were getting 4.5, some were getting 6, and then they switched it. And the truth is, people couldn't tell the difference between how they felt after 4.5 hours, after 6, and yet their performance diminished with the lesser amount of sleep. And so sometimes we can't even be the best judge of character. But if you fall asleep the first time you sit in that chair and you put your head back, well, you're probably not getting enough sleep. I mean, that's clear. And power naps are great for some people. Some people just need a good night's sleep. And it's not a waste of time because you should be able to perform better when you are fully awake. H stands for, in the MESH word, H stands for hydration. We didn't even talk about this, but when you work with athletes, as I have in the past, you know that not getting enough fluid can dehydrate you and decrease your performance. Well, everybody has known that for decades with athletes. But we forget to realize that works for us as well. And so when we're dehydrated, even just 1% of our body weight, which isn't very much. So if you're 150 pounds, that's 1.5 pounds, which is a pint is a pound the whole world around. Maybe you remember that. So 1.5 pounds is 3 cups of fluid. In other words, if you go to a restaurant and you go, and you down a whole glass of water and ask for a refill, you're probably at least 1% dehydrated. If you go to the bathroom, your urine is yellow and it wasn't a vitamin C supplement that you took or anything that's discoloring it, well, then you're probably dehydrated. And that affects your mood. It affects your performance. It affects your fatigue. And so simple little things like getting enough movement, eating to fuel your body, getting adequate sleep and hydrating can be enough to reboot your energy so you can perform better, both in a physical way, an emotional way, a spiritual way in your career, enjoy it more, and have more fun at the end of the day. So that's my advice. Think about MESH.
It's a great prescription, Joe, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, as well as the really fascinating details about your journey to the point where you are now. Once again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you. So tell us about your website, your email, and most importantly, the book. Where can we find those things?
Excellent. So my name is Dr. Joe, and my website is simple, drjo.com. There's no E at the end of Joe. That's my brother Joseph. He's named Joe. I'm just J-O. So drjo.com. Social media, I'm at Go Dr. Joe because Twitter required 6 letters. So it's Godrjo. But I'm Go Dr. Joe everywhere. You can find me there. You can send me an email at drjo@drjo.com. How simple can it be? And also, in addition to my book, REBOOT, which best thing to do is just go to Amazon and get that there, an ebook or paperback. But also just want to remind you all that I do speak. That is, my primary income right now. And I love getting in front of healthcare professionals and talk to them because sometimes healthcare professionals take the least amount of effort to take care of their own personal health. And so to, help people with that, I also am working on an online course with a bunch of videos so people can dive into that and learn all the specific aspects of this and hopefully make a big difference in their lives as well as the lives of the people that they love and the people that they care for. So check out drjoe.com.
Dr. Joe Lichten, fuel efficiency expert. Thank you so much for being with us. It's just been a lot of fun talking to you, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Randy.
And with that, it's time to bring this episode of Prescription for Success to a close. Before we go, I'd like to remind everyone that you can review the show notes and find a little more background information about my guests at our podcast website, rxforsuccesspodcast.com. That's rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, we'd love to have you join us as a subscriber. If you enjoy the program and would like to help spread the word, just take a screenshot of your phone while you're listening and post that picture to your favorite social media platforms using hashtag RxForSuccess. We really appreciate your support. Thank you very much for listening. And don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.